Hello and welcome to the Highway to Health Show. I'm your host, Dr. E, the Stem Cell Guy. In this episode, I am joined by Eric Zimmer. Eric is a behavior coach, author, and the host of the One You Feed podcast. He is endlessly inspired by the quest for a greater understanding of how our minds work and how to intentionally create the lives we want to live. As you will hear in this interview, Eric has been through a lot. At the age of 24, he was homeless, addicted to heroin, and facing long jail sentences. In the years since, he's not only found a way to overcome these obstacles to create a life worth living, but he now helps others to do the same. Stick around to learn exactly how Eric helps his clients navigate through life's crisis and come out on the other side stronger and with a renewed sense of purpose. Before we go into today's interview, let me remind you that this show is a labor of love, which I do in my spare time. My current day job is running a company where we help doctors and other practicing health professionals become better entrepreneurs, allowing them to serve more patients and provide a better life for their families. If you are a health professional or you know of an amazing doctor, dentist, chiropractor, or any other practicing doctor who deserves to be doing better in business, check out pgformula.com. This episode is sponsored and produced by podcastinthebox.co. I remember when I first launched my podcast, I had been thinking about doing it for years. I had read 2 books on the subject and signed up for an online course, and I still did not launch that podcast. You see, back then I was running a busy stem cell practice, teaching at a university, and traveling for conferences, so it was really hard to find the time to start and maintain a new project like this podcast, which is where Podcast in a Box came in. The team at Podcast in a Box handled everything, and I mean everything that had to do with planning, launching, editing, publishing, and marketing a podcast, because proper podcasting is not just about buying a microphone and rambling on. There is so much more than that. If you're a busy doctor, lawyer, accountant, business owner, or anyone looking to build a personal brand to instill trust in your clients so they will want to buy your products or services, but you don't have the time or the desire to learn the technical side of podcasting, Pockets in a Box might be right for you. To find out more and see if your idea is worthy of a podcast, just head on over to podcastinthebox.co and click on the appropriate button. When prompted, make sure to mention Dr. E's Highway to Health show in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Now, speaking about podcast production, I want to ask you to please bear with me and my guests in this and a few of the upcoming episodes since they've been recorded during this COVID quarantine, where we're both at home, usually on a shared Wi-Fi connection with the rest of our families, and so, well, there's a few drops in connection here and there. The guys at Pockets in a Box did a great job of salvaging most of the conversation, but there are still certain places where there was nothing that could be done to avoid it. I think they're barely noticeable, but I'll let you be the judge of that. In any case, let's get to it. Here is my conversation with Eric Zimmer. And remember, you are on the highway to health, and I'm your guide to get you there.
Are you ready to live ageless? Want to discover alternative health choices? Cutting-edge nutrition and fitness for the entire family? Welcome to Highway to Health Show with your host, Dr. E, the Stem Cell Guy, where Dr. E helps you live ageless. And now, here's your host, Dr. E.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Highway to Health Show. I'm your host, Dr. E, the Stem Cell Guy, and sitting with me today is Eric Zimmer. Eric, how are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you say hi to our audience and share with us a little bit of how do you get started doing what you're currently doing?
Well, hello, audience. Hello, everyone. Nice to talk with you. In some ways, there's a really long answer to that and a really short answer to that, right? I mean, I'm a podcast host and a behavior coach, and the short answer to how I got started doing it was I just got started doing it. One day I decided I thought it would be fun to do a podcast, and so I launched one and started doing it. The longer version of that could be really long, but I won't make it too long. But my podcast is about how the choices we make in life impact our overall well-being. It's based on a parable of 2 wolves where, we've got a good and a bad wolf inside of us, and the one that wins is the one we feed. So, it points to our choices. And so I first heard that parable a long time ago. I was 25 years old. I was a homeless heroin addict. I weighed 100 pounds. I had hepatitis C. I was dying, and I heard that parable, and it had a great deal of resonance for me because I was at a point in my life where it was really clear, like I can do these sort of things and I'm going to recover, or I can do these sort of things and I'm likely going to die, or I'm going to go to jail for a long time. So, which, was very, very prominent choice. So, and that early heroin addiction pushed me into an interest in personal development, in growth, in spirituality, and all that stuff. I kind of was just forced into that. But as I did, I found, well, I love this stuff. And so a great number of years later, after a long career in various software startup companies, and after founding my own solar energy company, I eventually hit a point where I wanted to do something, something a little bit more meaningful. And so I started this podcast as an attempt to do that. I started it as a way to help my own mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And then from there, it sort of grew and it turned into what I do for a living. But that wasn't the original intention. The original intention was really like, I just want to do this because it sounds like it would be really good for me. And my best friend was an audio engineer, and I was like, oh, I'll get to spend more time with him, and that's a good thing. So
Yeah, for sure. I've so my company, now that I'm currently not practicing, well, we moved to Spain. I'm still waiting for my paperwork. So the company that I spend most of the time working on right now is a coaching and consulting for doctors and healthcare professionals in business entrepreneurship. And we actually produce and market podcasts for doctors.
mhm.
And the funny thing is exactly what you just mentioned. The ones that are the most successful are the ones that decide they have something to share, that they've got some knowledge that they want to share with an audience, not necessarily with potential patients, but they're like, you know what, I've been in health for X amount of years, and I think I've got something to share. I'd like to empower other people. And then they get started and it becomes very successful. And then we have the other ones who suddenly say like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a podcast because, I see a lot of people making a lot of money from it. And those don't seem to be the right motivators to get started. And
Yeah.
it's funny how one thing goes to the next. But anyway, going back to the parable, I heard that parable as well. Maybe for the first time was about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, from my mentor, from Darren Hardy. And it also resonated with me a lot. At the time, I'm not going to say in a dark place, but I was certainly struggling both personally and professionally. The girl that I was living with had recently just moved back to her country, and I was left alone. I had never really lived by myself, like completely alone. There was nobody. I didn't even have a dog back then, so it was kind of hard. And that's when I began my own personal development journey as well, because before that, and I was probably around 30, 31 at the time. And before that, you hear personal development and you just think like, yeah, no, that's for losers. And nobody who thinks they're cool wants to do personal development, because we assume that, I'm cool. Why am I going to need that? Right. And I started learning, and just like you, I just fell in love with this whole thing, that I could study something and become better at whatever I wanted to do. So
Yeah.
that's also a parable that is very close to my heart, because it makes total sense. Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with it, would you mind expanding on it a little bit?
Yeah. I'll give it the full treatment. Yeah, it's an old podcast. It's an old parable. Nobody really knows where it comes from. Some people insist it's a Native American. Some Native Americans insist it is. Other Native Americans are like, no, there's no way that is. No one knows. So I've tried to find out. But it's not important. Origin is not important. It's an old story. And it goes like this. There's a grandfather who's talking with his grandson. He says, in life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandson stops, thinks about it for a second. He looks up at his grandfather. He says, well, grandfather, which one wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. So that's the parable, which, again, when we hear it, we almost immediately get it on one level, because we're like, oh, I mean, that's what a good parable does, right? It teaches, it teaches something very intuitively. And very intuitively, we hear it and we go, oh yeah, my choices matter, I guess. What I think about, how I choose to spend my time, what I do matters. At least that's
Exactly.
the first interpretation that comes up.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that really got me, because it makes total sense. Whatever you're feeding your mind, whatever you're putting in the most of, is what's going to be more prevalent. And it's actually even clearer right now as we live through this current crisis, this pandemic, all over the world, and we're seeing people who are still struggling, people who are afraid, people who are terrified about what's going to come down the road, and then we see a few other people who are actually, I don't want to say excited about what's happening, but excited about the new doors and the new possibilities that are going to be opening up. And it tells you the exact same thing. The first group is probably just listening to sensationalistic media, and that they're putting out all these awful headlines, and they're putting out shows about how the economy's tanking and the health is tanking, and how no new casualties keep piling up. However, there are a lot of new opportunities coming up, and there are a lot of very positive things that we're seeing out in the world. So depending on where you focus your attention is the lens through which you're going to be seeing the rest of your life experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that some degree of fear is a normal reaction to what's happening right now. I think there are people who have more reason to be afraid than some other people, people who have lost their jobs and all that. Um, but yeah, I think at a fundamental level, if all we're consuming is, like you said, sensationalistic journalism that paints the catastrophe, that's all we see. I had a group coaching call this morning. I talked about an idea that comes out of certain older religious traditions and psychology of something called liminal space. And liminal space is a transition. The word liminal means threshold, from Latin limen. So, and that's where we are. We're in this transition space. We're in this, like, well, what came before appears like, all right, world's going to be very different moving forward, but we don't really know what that's going to look like. And liminal spaces, the reason they're talked about in religious and psychological terms is that, approached correctly, they can be spaces of tremendous growth, because what they've done is they have taken away our normal certainties, our normal behaviors, our normal routines, all the things that just sort of keep life sort of skimming along the surface. All that is gone. And all of a sudden, we have these opportunities for deeper growth. And I think we do have those. And again, I'm always hesitant. I don't want to turn the suffering of lots of people in the world into like my personal growth opportunity. Like I think we want to be sensitive about this. That said, right, we have a choice about how we approach a situation. How do we want to respond? The question that I asked myself very early in this, and I've asked listeners a lot, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on, is who do I want to be through this? How do I want to respond? What do I want to bring? And I think you're right. We have that choice.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a great question to ask ourselves. I've recently taken more seriously a daily journaling
Mm-hmm.
practice. So I had been doing it kind of like on and off, and it was more like a checklist kind of journal. That was very, very valuable. But I've recently started like a free flow journal, and I think that's a great question to start asking ourselves, especially as we go through this crisis. I've been asking myself a couple of very important questions, and one of them that I really like is what would I do right now if I was not afraid?
Yeah.
Because there's always some fear of something. There's always something holding us back. There's always something that we're deciding against or in favor of based on fear of trying to avoid something. So that's been a very good exercise. And now this new question that you pose, I think is also very valuable and very interesting to ponder about during these journaling sessions. Now, as a behavioral coach,
Mm-hmm.
what are you currently seeing right now with your clients, with the groups that you work with? What are you currently seeing is affecting them the most? What are the kind of tools that you are giving them right now in order to be able to thrive through this current situation?
I think the biggest challenge has been the loss of structure and routine. You know, we had a structure and routine. We got up in the morning, we did this, we got the kids ready for school, we got out the door, they went to school, we went to work. That our work life had this certain structure to it, and then we picked up the kid, and that's all gone. I do my workout at 7 in the morning because I got to be out the door by 8, or I do it, and all of a sudden it just disappears, and there is no structure. And so I've seen a lot of people feeling like they're just flailing because without structure, we've had sort of the introduction of both no structure and fear at the same time, and that has tended to produce chaos in people's personal lives. People are just, they don't, people, not going to bed at a certain time, not getting up at a certain time, not starting work at a certain time. They're just work and personal life just blending into one big undifferentiated thing. So one of the biggest things that I've worked with a lot of people on is introducing structure. I'm a big believer in, as a behavior coach, in habits, routine, and structure, right? And I think that structure, we can think of structure as confining, but a better way to think of structure is to think of it as we would think of the structural elements we put into a home. We put a foundation in, we put structural beams, and the point is to hold the thing up, right? And so a good structure holds us up, and it liberates us. And one of the things it liberates us from is having to figure everything out all the time. And so now all of a sudden it's like, before we kind of, like I said, we sort of knew, like, all right, if I'm going to work out, it's going to have to happen in this time window. But now it's like, well, I don't have to be up at 7 anymore. Like, why not sleep till 8:30? Like, who cares, and so really working with people to introduce structure. And I found it helpful to work with people to introduce sort of 4 pieces of structure to start.
Okay.
Which is what time I get up, what time I start my work or whatever sort of productivity thing I'm doing. So maybe if I'm not working, I've decided I'm going to improve my skills in this area, or, but when am I going to do that? When am I going to do like self-care things like exercise or meditation or that sort of thing? And then what time am I going to go to bed? I think those 4 elements, if we can at least get those 4 sort of back into place, that helps establish and reestablish structure for us.
I think that's a great starting point, because you're absolutely right. I think for a long time, we've all developed a routine that more or less works for us, for a family, and that keeps us operating. But once this whole thing happened and it became our new normal, like the first couple of days, everyone thought like, well, yeah, we're in shock. But then after, week 1, we realized that this is our new normal, but our routines, or the routines that we were used to, are no longer applicable. So for a lot of people, it's a time to reevaluate. And for many others, it's a time that they've started, or they've completely forgotten about them, or thrown them out the window. And from my point of view as a physician, one of the most paradoxical things is that now is the time that we really need to take good care of ourselves, of our bodies, so that if we are exposed to this virus, we will be able to fight it off. Because remember, the virus is not that it's very lethal. It's not Ebola. The thing is, it's very contagious. And the one thing we don't want is for it to be spread to too many people and to develop, serious complications. Now, what happens is that if we stay up until 2, 3 in the morning watching Netflix, eating junk food, and not sleeping well, and doing all these things that we normally are not doing, not working out, not eating well, not having any physical activity, then we are setting ourselves up for failure. So that's why it's most important. And it cost me as well. And it probably you struggled with it as well at the first couple of days, because it's very easy to just get sidetracked. Was this the case with you? It definitely was with me.
Yeah. I've been fortunate in that my routines haven't changed a whole lot because I worked out of home anyway, and my son is 21 years old, and so it wasn't like I suddenly had to figure out how to work from home. It wasn't like I suddenly had children in that home all day that used to go to school, or so the it didn't affect me as much in that way, but certainly in the early days, yeah, I think it's just like this thing was like, it just drew so much of my attention, you know. But I've, as a since I do this sort of coaching and this sort of stuff, for a living, it's never far from my mind to sort of stay on track with this stuff. And I've just learned, through personal experience, like I'm one of those people that's really sensitive to not exercising. Like if I exercise mainly for my mental health. I've wrestled with depression my whole adult life. And so exercise for me is just one of those things that like I know is really important for me to do. So I definitely had a little bit of a impact when this started happening, but not like a lot of people, because again, my basic routines didn't have to change.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, for me, it did change quite a bit.
Yeah,
And it was kind of hard because part of my stubbornness wanted to be able to still figure out how I could fit my routines
yeah,
into my new limitations. And it wasn't until very recently, and we've been like over here in Spain, we were just talking about that before we started recording. We are about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of what's happening in the US, or what's been happening in the US. So we've been at home for 5 weeks right now because my family and we decided to lock ourselves in for a week before. My wife is pregnant. We have a toddler.
yeah,
It just didn't make sense to start risking ourselves when we saw what was happening in Italy. But for me, it took me a long time, like 3, maybe 4 weeks. And recently I just started saying, listen, let's just figure out the fundamentals and let's get the very, very basics. And that's when I started, you know what, let's take good care of my sleep. That's why I'm recording at 8 p.m. and I'm wearing my blue light blockers, because I realized that was affecting my sleep. And I cannot go outside and do a workout. I cannot go for a run. So I'll do burpees in the morning.
yeah,
And instead of doing, my regular meditation and doing my entire routine, I'm just going to figure out what are the most important things to
yes,
move the needle, in terms of my business and in terms of other things, because it's inevitable that my 2-year-old or my 1.5-year-old, 2.5-year-old is going to walk in at some point and is going to interrupt me. And I'm not going to be able to have, deep work for 2 hours. So that's what
yeah.
I've been doing, but not until recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen, so many, a lot of people, I'd say, with all these changes are working at about 60% of what their normal capacity is, and just sort of being okay with that, being like, okay, you know what, like I'm doing the best I can with this right now.
Exactly. That's what I had to figure out. Like, listen, I'm going to do the best with what I can right now and stop tormenting myself about not doing it at my fullest extent. And I'm going to say, okay, so what are the most important things that I should be looking at? And I'm definitely going to do those. So that's what I'm doing. I'm waking up, I'm doing my journaling, I'm doing short meditation. And the one thing that I'm trying to focus on is do 60 minutes of create before I consume. So anything before I just check my messages or do anything, I try to create something. And then I've at least gotten the most important things out of the way. And as soon as you and I finish recording this, I'm gonna go, start winding down and go to bed, because
Yep,
that's what I've noticed. This is what's important around this times.
yep, yep. That makes sense.
Now, as a behavioral coach, and based on your experience, how do you see this moving forward? Because we're obviously going to live through this. Of course, it's hard for a lot of people to think of a world, where we will no longer have to be quarantined, and we will be able to go outside of social places again. But it will happen, and business will return back to a new way of normalcy. How do you see this affecting us in terms of our behavior moving forward? What do you think is going to be the effect?
It's a great question, and I don't know that I have a good answer, because I don't feel like I know what the new normal is really going to look like for people. Um, I'm hoping that, like you probably hope often, I'm hoping that it will help us to take care, to look at ourselves and our physical and mental and emotional health and take it a little more seriously. I think for a lot of people, what the crisis brings up is like, oh, I'm not very well prepared for a crisis, right?
That's
Like,
exactly what I was thinking.
I'm not in good health. I'm not in good emotional health. I don't have good coping skills. I don't, um, kind of on down the line. And that for some people, this will be an opportunity to say, okay, you know what? Boy, really anything can happen. Maybe I need to make sure my own house is in a little bit better shape as far as my physical health and my mental and my emotional health. And that I want to have those things in place so that I'm better able to weather a storm, of whatever kind that is.
Yeah, because the storms are coming all the time. Now, what happened is that we are all going through crisis at the same time, but there's always
Yes.
crises around our lives. We can lose a
Yes.
loved one, we can lose our job, we can have financial setbacks. We can, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen to ourselves, and I think, like you very well said, I think that one of the things that this will do for all of us is bring that awareness that we never know when something like this is going to strike, and we need to figure out what's important and be well prepared at all times, because you'd be surprised how many times I've spoken to someone, and like I said, I coach and I consult with doctors, and most of them run their own private practices, and they've had to lay people off, and they've had to downsize, and they've had to ask for loans and things like that, and many of them are saying, like, listen, from now on, I'm going to make sure that this is never going to happen. And I'm going to make sure that I always have 2 months of expenses in cash. And I'm going to make sure that I have this, and I'm going to make sure that I have that. So it's kind of like when somebody has one of those near death experiences and that changes your life. I think we're all going through it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. I mean, what this has done is caused us all to go through this at the same time. But the reality of life is uncertain at all times. It always is this. It's always the way it is right now. We just are able to not be aware of it. There's a author, Mark Nepo, who I love, he has something he calls the terrible knowledge. And the terrible knowledge is the knowledge that anything can happen to any of us at any time.
Yep.
It's it's but it's all but you know knowing the truth is good even when it's a hard truth.
Yeah, for sure. And being prepared, it reminds me of Ryan Holiday talking about memento mori with what's Marcus Aurelius, that he was always reminding himself that death is just around the corner. You
Yeah.
just don't know how far away the corner is, but
Yep.
it's there, and you should be prepared, and you should be living your life in a way. Now, is this something that you're currently working to equip your clients with? Is this something that obviously a lot of the times when we talk to someone like yourself, when I talk to someone like yourself who has been working with a group of people, um, developing them and helping them grow as individuals, obviously you've already done some work with them, so they're probably already better equipped than the average person. But what are you seeing them struggle with during these times, um, that we haven't spoken about, or that you've been able to help them with during these crises?
Well, it's been interesting because, you're right. On one hand, most of my clients have come to me um, in advance of this, and they've come to me because they've somehow made some assessment in their life, like, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not doing the things that I want to do. I'm not, in some aspect or all aspects of my life, I'm not living the way I want to live, and I can't seem to make that change on my own. So the people who come to me were already working on a lot of these things. But for a lot of those people, we've seen, like I said, similar to what we talked about before, similar to kind of what happened to you. We've seen like this 3-week period where it's like the bottom sort of got knocked out of everything we were doing. It was like, whoa, and now we're trying to find ways to, reestablish what we're working on, get back on track, get our habits back in place, get our routines back, and continue to do that. And I think then, the other thing I'm working with a lot of people on it, and this is a theme of the show that is often there, is, sometimes we don't, very often we don't become great in spite of our difficulties, but because of them, And so a theme of a lot of the work that I do in my coaching program, we've got something called a spiritual habits program. We're looking at how do we take adversity and turn it into something positive? What are the things that cause that to be able to happen? So certainly looking at that with with clients.
That's actually a really interesting concept. Would you mind walking us through a little bit about how can we start looking at this as something that is going to make us grow down the road? How can we start reframing in a way? And I don't know if that's the right word. This whole world crisis that we're all going through, so that it is a moment of growth, so that it is a catalyst of change for ourselves, not just for, yeah, there's opportunities in the workforce, there's all these things, but how can we make it be, I heard my mentor say that as long as we don't have a health tragedy in the family, or someone close to us is get really sick or dies, we should be able to look back at this time and think of it as the best time, or the best thing that could have happened to us at this time, because it catalyzed such a change. So how are you helping these people do this right now?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, I think you said this earlier, which is that, yes, this crisis has brought certain things to light, but it's not, the underlying condition is not that different, like this fact that anything can happen to us, that life is uncertain. The heart of the work I do with people is, I always say that if you can do these two things, you're going to have a good life, right? And that is, you have to be able to stop and think about what matters to you, what is important, and then you've got to translate that into a way of living. And then we have to be able to sort of keep doing that. What's important to me? What matters? Am I living that way? That's the basic skill. And so what a time like this can provide for us is, like I said earlier, calling it a liminal space, right? Liminal spaces are often thought of as spaces for growth, right? And so I think the key thing that we can do is to ask ourselves, what really matters to me? Am I living life the way that I want? Am I spending my time on what matters? Am I spending my time on things that I value? And that's the fundamental work to be done in all times to bring about transformation, is to really reflect on how we're living, reflect on what's important, and then try and make those two match each other. I mean,
Gotcha.
that's the heart of it, Now, how we do that, particularly the second part is, making our lives match our values. That's a lot of work. But I think that this is a really good opportunity to stop and go, what's important? Is the way I'm living the way I want to? I just think times like this allow us to stop and go a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
A lot of people are saying, hey, I've got time. I've got more time now. I don't have to commute 2 hours. I'm not sure what to do. Like, that's how this becomes a growth opportunity. It becomes a growth opportunity by allowing ourselves to inhabit this space. There's a lot of research out there that says that we turn adversity into something positive when we when we actually really reflect on what's happening, and we allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling. We allow ourselves to inhabit the place we're in, and we really reflect on those things. And then out of that emerges new meaning, and that's what I think we have an opportunity to do, is craft new meaning for ourselves.
I could not agree more with that, because you're absolutely right. We lack, and I've spoken about this in other episodes, how we lack that self-awareness time, how we lack that time of reflection, that time of stillness. And Cal Newport talks about it in his book, both in Deep Work and in Digital Minimalism, about how we're constantly bombarded by input, and we rarely have the time to really digest all those inputs that we're receiving and form our own conclusions and create something. So you also mentioned something very interesting, going back to the parable of your company, your podcast, and the one you feed. And it is that people are finding themselves right now with an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in the day, and how we're going to emerge from this quarantine in 3, 4, 5 weeks, however long it takes, will depend on how are we using those times. Are we investing 5 or 6 extra hours on Netflix and YouTube and Instagram, which by the way, we'll never finish with that. There's no, oh, I'm almost done with Instagram. Like, you're never going to finish that. Or are you using it to create something that you've always meant to do? And I've seen people who've decided, you know what, I finally decided to take that guitar playing course that I've been thinking about. I've decided to start writing my book. I've decided to create my new website for my side gig. I've decided to do these things. But most people are simply spending 2 or 3 times as much time as they did in time wasting activities.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, I'm trying to straddle this line when I talk to people, and I don't quite know how to do it. So I'll just say what it is, and then I'll just talk freely, right? And that line is similar. You said a few minutes ago, like, it took me like 3 weeks to kind of get my crap back together, right? Like, and I was, you were just blasting yourself for, why can't I perform at my normal levels, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that's like, we'll go on social media and we'll see like, oh, somebody has learned 5 new languages since we went into quarantine. And we'll just be like, I'm barely getting out of bed by 10 a.m. Like, what? I suck, right? So I'm sensitive to that this has been a difficult time. And for some of us, like, particularly given what our the way we respond to fear and anxiety maybe a little bit different. And so I want to encourage some degree of gentleness with ourselves, right? And at the same time, the truth is simply, the choices that we make, how we spend our time, is going to determine what we get out of our life. And if we spend 7 hours a day watching Netflix, then what we're going to get is what a life that has 7 hours a day of Netflix in it, which is not for most of us. If you watch Netflix 7 hours a day and you feel good and happy, keep doing it, for crying out loud. Most of us, that will not lead to us feeling good. That will not lead to us. It will lead to regret and feeling bad. And so, this is, like I said, I think that the work I do with people is constantly a process of what really matters to me, what's important to me, and is my life reflecting that? And where it's not, how do I adjust that? And those are difficult things to do. It can be difficult to go from 2 or 3 hours of social media a day to doing something more constructive, but it's imminently possible, and again, that will determine, there's just no shortcutting the basic fact that we kind of get out of life what we put into it.
Sure.
There's no getting around that, which is, I wish it was easier than that.
And that's why I like having professional coaches here, because I'm very black and white. And you're absolutely right. I think that for some people, thinking about it that way would be a lot of pressure. I've been seeing that meme go around, which I don't even know if it was true, that Isaac Newton was quarantined for the past back in the day, and that's where he discovered so many things, and the light bulb and so on. And the meme says, like, "How are you doing with Netflix?" And no pressure. So I don't think that's really serving anyone. And you're absolutely right. For me, it's very easy to just think like, well, you know what, you've got to do this. But in all complete honesty, I've increased my use of social media these last few days, especially the first couple of weeks. And that's when I realized, and I said, listen, what's going to happen after this whole quarantine happens? Am I going to have those 15 extra pounds that everyone keeps talking about? Am I going to be weaker? Am I going to be slower? Am I going to be, less prepared? Or am I going to take the time and do this? So little by little, that's why I decided, okay, let's start with the fundamentals and what are the variables? What are the things that I can control? It's what time I go to bed, what I do first thing in the morning, what I eat, and how much, and if I move. And that's what I'm currently doing. Now, on the positive, it also allows me to spend some more time with my family, and to spend some more time with my wife, and to spend some more of these different things that a lot of the times we stop doing simply because we didn't have the time. So it's a good opportunity to reflect overall. And you're absolutely right. I think that's the key takeaway. It's, being intentional about what we're really going to be doing throughout these days.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. And that point is that telling ourselves we suck all the time is not the way we change, right? It doesn't work that way. And I often say to people, like, It's not you, it's your approach, right? It's you know, we sometimes we need help in figuring out how to structure our life, how to make change. I mean, there was a period of time like I couldn't stop putting a needle in my arm, right? Like so it's not like I was like there was this, I was fundamentally deep inside, I was this kind of person. I just needed to learn some skills. And I think that's often what happens is we get down on ourselves and we're like, oh, I'm just the kind of person who can't stick with things. I'm just the kind of person who wastes my time. I'm just the kind of person who has no discipline, right? And having done a lot of work with a lot of people, I don't think that's true. And so, it's why I like that phrase. It's not you, it's your approach, right? And so we know a lot from behavioral science about how people make change. We know, and what you're describing is a great way to do it, which is, okay, let me bring the bar down a little bit here, and let me focus on the fundamentals, and let me get some basic things in place. Let me start feeling good about that. Let me start getting a little bit of momentum, and then let me build from that. So many of us fail so often because we set the bar so high. We're all or nothing. It's either like, I'm running 8 miles a day, I'm journaling, I'm working on my next novel, we're doing all this, or it's just, what's the point, right? And we've got to find a way to inhabit a middle space. And
And you
that's the
can
way growth
eventually
occurs.
get back to that big standard. It happens all the time, and I see it all the time as a physician. And my background is in age management medicine, so I work with 50-year-olds to 60-year-olds who have been have neglected their health, and suddenly they want to get back in the game, and they want to start feeling good, and they want to have good high energy and be around for their grandkids and so on. And they think that going back to exercising, they'll be able to just go back in and do what they used to do in their 20s and 30s. And obviously that really doesn't make sense when anybody thinks about it, but we do try to do that all the time with our habits. Just
Yes.
because at one time I was super productive, it doesn't necessarily mean that now that the situation has changed, I should be able to do all those things. I need to start again by the fundamentals and then build it up if
I,
it is where I want to go.
I couldn't agree more. And I think here's where a lot of people get lost. I sort of had this insight working with some clients recently, and is a lot of people now have heard that and they go, okay, I'm going to start small. But when they start small, the whole time they're starting small, they're going, yeah, but it doesn't really matter. Like, I walked around the block 2 times, but who cares? I mean, I used to run 10 miles, I suck. Right. And one of the things we know is that people, and I'm quoting the Stanford researcher, BJ Fogg, people change better by feeling good than feeling bad. Which means if you used to run 10 miles and you haven't worked out in 10 years and you need to you can only walk around the block 3 times to start, you've got to find some way to feel good about walking around that block 3 times. You've got to say, yes, I did it. I did what I said I was going to do. Because what happens when that happens is our motivation goes up when we feel hope, when we feel proud, when we feel confident. Those things increase motivation, and doubt and fear and self-loathing, those things push motivation down. And so we've got to start small. And as we start smaller, we've got to allow ourselves to celebrate the fact that we are doing something. And then we slowly build. And there's no doubt that this idea of starting small and building really, really works, but we have to allow ourselves to be there. And it's a phrase I use all the time, which is a little bit of something is better than a lot of nothing.
Exactly.
And
We
that's
get
where
that all
people
the time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do that often. You think about dieting, and people think that if they cannot follow the super strict organic, uh, you know, 100% to the letter diet, then they might as well just go out for Big Macs and French fries,
Yes.
because they just can't follow the diet.
Yeah.
So same thing with exercise, and same thing with everything else. So I think that's a great reminder. Let's switch gears a little bit here, if you don't mind. Normally, I always like to ask our guests for a few pieces of actionable advice that our listeners can start applying right away once they finish listening to this episode, or even if they can start applying it while they're listening, that's even better. So in your experience, somebody who's listening to us right now and they're exactly in the same situation you and I just described, they're usually working, now they're stuck at home with kids, and they're trying to find their bearings in this new normal. What would be your top 2 or 3 actionable recommendations for these moms and these dads who are now found themselves in this new normal?
Yep. I say the very first one would be work with your partner and your children, if they're of age appropriate, to come up with a schedule that everybody agrees to. Who's going to do what when? If you're at home with your partner and you're both having to work from home, who's got the kids when? Who's working with the kids during what time? I see a lot of confusion among this, and a lot of frustration among partners, because they're not coordinating that enough. And so they're getting frustrated with each other because they're like, well, why is she not doing it? Why is he not doing it? So I think coming up with, and again, if you can get your kids to buy into it, if they're old enough, even better. What is a schedule that's going to work for us? And again, I think that schedule at a minimum, right, it should focus on what time do we get up? What time do we go to bed? What are our working hours? And then, where are we going to put in a little bit of self-care, even if it's 5 minutes of exercise, or, there's a great workout called the 7-minute workout. Where am I going to do it? We know for sure that specificity helps with behavior. Knowing when I'm going to do something makes it way more likely I'm going to do it. So I would say creating that sort of schedule would be, really one of the very first things.
And I think it's crucial, because you're absolutely
got your everybody's bought in. Everybody's bought in.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Most of the time we assume that the other person will do it because, well, she knows that I got to work, and she's thinking the same thing. And the kids are thinking, well, I'm at home and he's right there, so I might as well just go into his office and talk to him, right? So being clear and talking. And this is actually a great exercise, because a lot of the times families don't really talk. I mean, they live together, but they don't really talk, and they don't really agree on things, and they don't really do plans. We tend to think, I remember one of my uncles, he used to have family meetings with his kids, and the rest of us used to make fun of him. And now I realize, like, listen, a lot of the times we need to get on the same page, especially when kids are of a certain age, because you need to figure out, okay, who's going to do what, and can I trust you to do this?
Yep. No, very, very wise. I'm a big believer in the more we talk about things, the better. So much confusion happens, and resentment and all that, because we're just not clear with each other about what's actually going to happen. We just assume we've got a plan in our mind, and we just assume the rest of the world knows what that plan is. And then the second thing I would do is to say, find some way to move your body some each day. Like, again, I just mentioned something called the 7-minute workout. You can Google it. You do the 7-minute workout, you will get your heart rate up, and you will move your body, and you will feel better at the end of it. Well, you might need a few minutes after it's over before you feel better. It's a hard workout, but it's a great little workout you could do in the smallest of places. You need no weights, no exercise, but find a way to move your body a little bit a day. And then the last one would be, this is a little bit less exactly like a thing you can do, but it would be this, which is allow yourself to feel what you feel about this crisis and what's happening and what's going on in your life. Allow it to be okay to feel the way you feel, and try and spend a little bit of time working with those emotions. Write about them. That's part of what makes us able to turn times like this into growth opportunities, is by actually allowing the emotions to be there, working with them. Trying to say, I shouldn't feel this way all the time, just doesn't work. It just doesn't help. And so allow yourself to be disappointed that you're stuck at home all the time. Allow yourself it's okay to be irritated with the people that are around you. Like, trying to pretend you're not irritated or tell yourself I shouldn't be irritated isn't any good. I'm not saying be a jerk to them. I'm saying get off by yourself, but allow yourself to be like, it's okay, I feel this way. Because if we could start to allow our feelings to be, it's just it makes things easier. Again, our behavior is a different animal. We're responsible for our behavior, but we're not responsible for that. We feel something.
Yeah.
We feel it. So let's there's a lot of difficult emotion going on right now. It's okay that that's happening. Find a way to work with it more skillfully. And the first element of working with emotions more skillfully is stop telling yourselves you shouldn't have them.
Yeah, for sure. I think acknowledging what we're feeling allows us to recognize, and like you very well said at the beginning, to really think through and digest what we're feeling, and maybe even grow from it, because we are able to see, okay, if I'm feeling this way, why am I feeling this way? Is it just because I cannot go out, or is it because I can't go out and then this is also happening?
Mm-hmm.
Is this limiting for this, or am I feeling worse? Because right now, the entire world is in the exact same position. We are stuck at home. However, for some of us, we're stressed because, it means that we're not able to run our businesses like we normally did, because we're not able to do certain things. But some other people who are in the exact same position, however, they made other choices before, they're thinking, well, you know what? I'm in a good place. I'll take advantage and I'll spend more time with my family. I'll do this. Why? Because I've been working on my business. So just really stopping and realizing why you're feeling what you're feeling and acknowledging it, I think is incredibly powerful. And like I said, this is coming from me, who just recently started a more intentional, free-flowing journaling method, and it's uncovered a lot of things. I'm a big believer of it right now, because I used to just think of journaling as almost a checklist. What did I do? What am I grateful for? What of blah, blah, but nothing really profound. So I think those are some great recommendations. Eric, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. I do want to acknowledge you for the work you're doing. I think that being able to talk so openly and so vulnerably about your past and your background and your life experiences is really something that not everyone is able to do. And I do want to acknowledge you for sharing that so openly with the world, because I know that it is empowering other people and helping them realize that, you know what, my situation is not as bad as his was, so I can probably do something with my life. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, for sure. And how can people find out more about you? Tell us where can they subscribe to your podcast?
Yeah, if you just go to oneyoufeed.net, that's all spelled out, ONEYOUFEED.net. Podcast is there, coaching services are there, all kinds of stuff.
So it's oneyoufeed.net or D1Ufeed?
Just oneyoufeed.net. Yep.
Perfect. So oneyoufeed.net, and you guys know the drill. I'm going to have the links to everything to all the resources that Eric has for you down in the description. Just scroll down in your podcast app and you'll find it right there. You can just tap directly. If you're watching on YouTube, same thing. Eric, one final question. Did you have a good time here in the Highway to Health show?
I sure did. Yes, I did. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself. I think we all got some very valuable information. For you listening at home, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions for myself or for Eric, you know what to do. Just send them over to dre.show/ask, and I'll see you here next week.
Thank you for listening to Dr. E's Highway to Health show, helping you learn the science of living ageless. Did you enjoy the show? Please like, share, and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Dr. E wants to hear from you. Go to dre.show. Again, that's dre.show. Until next time, this is Dr. E's Highway to Health, helping you live ageless.
So there you have it. That was my conversation with Eric Zimmer. I hope you enjoyed it and got some great tips and actionable advice from it. What was your favorite takeaway? Tag me on Instagram or connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think. By the way, remember that you can find the links to everything we discussed in this episode in the show notes. You scroll down to this episode's description on your podcast app and tap on the appropriate link. Speaking of links, remember to check out podcastinthebox.co for all your podcasting needs. If you are a busy entrepreneur looking to grow a personal brand and instill trust in your clients, there is no better way to do it than with a podcast. To learn how the team at Podcast in a Box can help you do just that, simply head on over to podcastinabox.co and find out more. Oh, and if you already have a podcast but find it hard and time consuming to keep up, they can help with that as well. Seriously, they're amazing. Just head on over to podcastinabox.co and let them know that Dr. E sent you. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You've been listening to Eric Zimmer and Dr. E talk about overcoming this and every other crisis in our lives better than when we started. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you here next week. And remember, you are on the highway to health, and I'm your guide to get you there.